Hili Hili, Hoyowishnim Amber. Hello everyone, my name is Amber Esquivel. Before we begin, we do have live transcript available, and you can enable this by clicking the bottom button to show subtitles or full transcript. I'm going to save the rest of my introduction for later, but I've been invited to share our land acknowledgement for the event, which reads, the Fresno State campus sits in the midst of the San Joaquin Valley, a valley rich in the traditions and representation of Native American peoples and cultures. We are grateful to be in the traditional homelands of the Yokuts and Mono peoples, whose diverse tribal communities share stewardship over this land. Our land acknowledgement was created by our Director of American Indian Studies, Dr. Leslie Oliver, here at Fresno State. And if you are a member of Fresno State faculty, staff, or a student watching us today, you are welcome to use this land acknowledgement in your syllabi. You can use it in your email signature when opening an event or before your next meeting. And at this time, I invite you all who are listening via Zoom and Facebook Live to please feel free to use the chat box and acknowledge the Native peoples whose land you're currently occupying. And while you're doing that, if you'd like to learn more about land acknowledgements, what they are, why do we use them, or how to create your own, if you're not from Fresno State, you can use the link that's being provided to you to download the resources. They have beautiful Zoom backgrounds, just like the one I'm using today, and a video that you can watch and learn more. But I want to dive deeper into our land acknowledgements, specifically on the terms Yokuts and Mono. So on the next slide, you'll see Yokuts and Mono are terms that are used to identify an area of where Native people reside, but the terms are not linked to one specific tribe. Okay, so Yokuts, like my tribe, that come from Picayune, means people in English. So on the screen to the left is a picture of California of our native land pre-contact, and to the right is a zoomed in glimpse of Central Valley, pointing out some of California's federally recognized tribes. And notice that I say federally recognized because we still have non-federally recognized tribes in our area. Okay, so Yokuts is primarily the green area on the map in the Central Valley, which includes tribes from Picayune, Table Mountain, Santa Rosa, Tule River, and our non-federally recognized tribes in our area are Choinumni, Uchumni, Dumna, Chowchilla tribe of Yokuts, to just name a few. And our Mono relatives in the yellow on the map are North Fork, Big Sandy, Cold Springs, and Dunlap Band of Mono Indians who are not federally recognized yet. And we have more, you know, you can see some from the right side. Those are our higher mountain relatives there. So when we say Yokuts and Mono, this is who and where we are talking about when those two terms are in our land acknowledgement, okay? Another great resource that is being used is called Nativeland.ca, and that link is being provided to you on the chat. It's a really cool resource to use where you can click on different areas of native land within the US and further to learn more. But just a quick disclaimer, it's not an official map, so not all tribes will pop up, but it's still really cool to check out. Again, I want to thank Dr. Patricia Lopez for inviting me and giving me this space and time to share our land acknowledgement and speak more about our Native people during this event. Each guys, thank you.
Thank you, Amber. As always, it's just been wonderful to work with you and just to have to bring you in, acknowledge, you know, the land and raising awareness of the histories and peoples that continue to be suppressed and erased, right? So elevating Native peoples and local knowledge are really explicit practices of anti-racism and anti-racist epistemologies. And buenas tardes, good afternoon, everyone. I just want to thank you for joining us today. This is our final anti-racism teach-in. We have been on a long journey starting last summer, and it's just incredible to see over a year pass by, and just the amount of growth and the amount of beauty that's just bloomed from these discussions. My name is Patricia Lopez. I'm an assistant professor in the Kremen School of Education and Human Development here at Fresno State. I'm also the director of Enseñamos en el Valle Central, which has the honor of sponsoring these ongoing anti-racism dialogues. Today's our final, which will focus on racialized trauma, healing, and the importance of belonging. For those of you who are for the first time participating in the event sponsored by Enseñamos, I want to thank you for being here and note that we are an initiative focused on cultivating future educators and sustaining current educators who embody a commitment to liberation, equity, justice, and anti-racism. I want to briefly just provide us with a shared definition of anti-racism, a concept with deep roots in abolition, the call to end slavery, and a call for structural changes in eradicating institutional racism in a post-emancipation society. Anti-racism places a central focus on the deeply embeddedness of racism and white supremacy in systems of power, policies, and everyday practices, many of them that we see in public and higher education. Anti-racism is committing to a journey of knowing these narratives, honoring those who in past and present are enduring this country's legacy of colonialism and systemic racism, and unlearning the conditioning of internalized racism, and recognizing that we cannot heal a society of racism without discomfort and devoid of structural changes and explicit anti-racist policies. So this journey is also an integral part of our approach to cultivating future educators who are bravely enacting anti-deficit and anti-racist pedagogies, and who are prioritizing the well-being and joy of young people and families. This commitment and priorities are also grounded and informed by a long history of community struggles for dignity, for self-determination, and for some access to a teaching profession and an education system that affirms their histories, their languages, community-based identities of those it serves, a system that does away with hierarchies by first owning the fact that they do exist, a system that acknowledges that formal institutions such as K-12 and higher education continue to be spaces of exclusion, of dehumanization, and are far too often spaces of spiritual and physical violence, which is why it's important for us to have these conversations in community. I know that history is also part of a legacy of community spaces, right, that have often been sites of affirmation and where brilliance and knowledge are known to thrive, right, outside of the formal institutions. And I can personally relate to this reality as a product of community centers, of art centers, of quote, alternative learning centers, right, that even today, as marginal that they still may be, they continue to fill a major void that formal institutions are just not doing when it comes to serving minoritized communities. So today we're going to have a conversation. We're going to name many of the root causes that bring about pain and trauma. These experiences are things that many of us here today have personally endured and perhaps continue to endure at all different levels. So our panelists are going to share the importance of just decolonial ways of knowing and being, and how important these fundamental paradigm shifts are perceptions of education, to our liberation, to feeling a sense of community and connectedness, and to our humanity. So with that said, let's all center ourselves. I can't say it enough. We can't say it enough. Grab your water, anything else that brings you comfort. Please be reminded that this is a safe space, a space of love, a space of respect for one another and for the beauty of our unique perspectives. So with that, I'm going to hand it to my colleague and friend, Dr. Raymond Henderson, who's going to transition us to the panelists. Gracias.
How's everybody doing today? Hope you're having a strong day. Before I intro the panelists, I just want to give a big shout out to Enseñamos and to my partner in crime, Dr. Lopez. I know you have a team and I know you don't like to be put on the spot, Dr. Lopez, but I do want to give you a shout out in the beginning versus at the end. So big shout out to you. Also, my name is Dr. Raymond Henderson. I'm assistant professor in the rehab counseling, counselor ed department in the Kremen School of Education. Also, my role here, and I want to take some time, is to lift up the excellence. We already have excellent folk. I'm just, paving a way, digging the trenches so folks can come through and let their light shine. So I'm really excited to hear what folks have to say today. Also, we want to encourage folks to engage in the chat. We want that chat to be jumping. For those who don't understand what that means, that's urban vernacular for we want the chat to have a lot of contributions. So we definitely want folks to be contributing in the chat. Also, this is a space where folks are going to speak their truths, and we're not going to allow any haters to exist and take that shine away. So this is a space to lift up truths, and we will not entertain any haters. I want to say that again, we will not entertain any haters. So with that being said, I'm going to introduce our lovely panelists, and this is in no particular order. I'm going to start off with Christelle Cortez. So Christelle is the co-founder and executive director of Express Arte, which is an organization that focuses on the voices of folks of color and co-creates programs and experiences that organize and advocate spaces with healing and hope. Christelle grew up surrounded by the mountains of the Sierra Gorda in San Luis de la Paz, Guanajuato, Mexico. Apologize if my enunciation was not the most accurate there. Before she immigrated to the US, Christelle is a community protector, survivor, warrior, and healer. Christelle, I'm looking forward to some good stuff. Next will be Reuben Garcia. Reuben is a member of the Manchester Band of Pomo Indians. He has been doing community work at Fresno American Indian Health Project for the past 8 years in different capacities, starting in prevention and early intervention, working to reduce stigma in the Native community and increase access to services. More recently, Reuben is working under FAIHP Youth Services and is focusing on Indian education and Native youth wellness work. Next is Amber Esquivel. Amber Esquivel is the outreach counselor for the Native American Institute under the Department of Outreach and Special Programs at Fresno State. She is local to us. She's a first gen from Fresno and alumna of Fresno State, where she earned her Bachelor of Arts degree in Liberal Studies, plus a Master's of Science degree in School Counseling with a Pupil Personnel Service Credential, PPS for short. Amber carries on her grandmother's legacy by working for all Native American people in the community and has a passion for helping students while encouraging them to prepare and pursue a college education. If you heard me emphasize some things, that was on purpose. Currently, in her free time, you can find her shopping for home decor and home items, as she is a recent first-time new homeowner and searching for new recipes to try. Next presenter, Esteban Para Guerrero. Esteban Para Guerrero serves as the coordinator of LGBTQ+ and gender programs and services, and supports the Men's Success Initiative at the Fresno State's Cross-Cultural and Gender Center. He serves on multiple committees and clubs, such as Women's Alliance, Rainbow Alumni and Allies Club, Latino Faculty and Staff Association, Allegra Mental Task Force, Pride Fund, and Rainbow Graduation Celebration Committee. Esteban is also a proud participant of the Fresno State's Folkloricio program, Los Danzantes de Aztlán. He values time, family relationships, and education. Personal note, Esteban is totally committed to service. That was not in his bio. I know that just through my personal interactions with him. So Esteban, love you, brother. Adrian Diaz. So Adrian Diaz is a community organizer based in Fresno, California, and the co-founder of Expressarte Cultural Wellness Collective. She was raised in the Coachella Valley and moved to the Central Valley in the middle of 2016. Although not a native to the area, she considers the Central Valley her home just as much as the desert. She advocates for her community to move forward together through transformative justice, healing, and abolition. No stranger to technology, she is also an advocate for digital organizing as a great addition to traditional grassroots organizing. Those are our panelists. And again, I want to just, I want folks to know that we will not entertain any haters. Please engage in the chat as you see fit. And we're going to transition to our first speaker, which is Amber.
I'm going to share my screen. 1 second. Okay. All right. So, as I mentioned, hili, my name again, Amber Esquivel. I come from the Piquillo Rancho Chukchansi Indians. And again, I'm the outreach counselor for the Native American Initiative under the Department of Outreach and Special Programs. You've heard my wonderful bio, and I always like to include that I'm a first-gen student because for a long time, I did not consider myself first-gen. And the reason for that was because I had other cousins who had graduated. My mom went to college, you know, but she didn't graduate, but I was like, no, she still went. Not until I got my master's degree was then when my mom said, you were the first. And with the Esquivel last name, you were the first to get your bachelor's and master's. And knowing that my dad has a family, he's the youngest of 10, my mom has a family of 8. And it's just like, whoa, like out of all these people, really, Mom, like me? Like, well, no wonder I was having those feelings or struggles in my first semester. So now I'm like, yes, I am first gen. I went through it and I'm here today. On the screen there, you have my contact information if you would like to write that down or save it for another time. If you would like to chat with me, collaborate, talk more about the stuff that I'm going to present about, you're welcome to call me. If you even want to send me an email and just say, hey, Amber, do you have a time at 1 o'clock to have a phone call? You're welcome to do that as well. A little bit about our department I want to share, outreach and special programs at Fresno State. Our outreach aspect is focused on K-8 students. So we really want to focus on that early outreach. And we know that we cannot wait until students are in 11th or 12th grade to start talking about college. So in our office, again, we focus on K-8 for the outreach aspect. Our special programs is like myself under the Native American Initiative. We have my colleague, Miss Wendy Nilsson for the African American Initiative. And we also have Upward Bound programs, education talent search programs. We have CalSOAP and Education Opportunity Center in our department. So moving forward, I just wanted to provide you all with some visuals of what does it look like in outreach, right? And so I try to put as much pictures as I can. So in outreach, I go to a lot of info booths. You can see here to the bottom left, or correct, that's the left side. But these pictures are all, again, pre-pandemic, right? So a lot of things have been shifted or haven't been able to provide because of the pandemic, like having an info booth, you know, but nonetheless, giving college presentations, doing campus tours, for both future, you know, 4th graders, 12th graders, transfer students. I've even done each year, I host a Native American Youth Conference that is at Fresno State. Last year we did it virtual, but it is open for 6th to 12th grade Native students. And it's a free event. They get free lunches, they get free t-shirts. Students come as far as Bakersfield, Stockton. Our Foothill students come down to Fresno, and we provide keynote speakers, workshops, some cultural sharing. As you can see, some of our Native students here are sharing some traditional songs and talking more about those songs, when to sing them. If you know the song, sing it with us, those types of things. And then all the while, you know, being a participant on our own campus within Native events that we have. So a lot of the pictures you can see, I'm not in the office, right? I'm out in the community, on campus, walking around campus. So these are just a quick visual of some of what outreach looks like. And then also, I have a link tree. So this is like a resource that you can have that you can share either with your colleagues, Native students at your schools, Native families, about, just how to get a hold of me on campus, how to sign up for my newsletter. I have other links on there for future students and Native scholarships as well. That's always a question I get a lot, is what kind of Native scholarships are there? So I try to keep my Linktree up to date with those types of resources. So you can save this, bookmark it. It's being provided for you in the chat as well. And then before we begin, I just want to say that I am not the spokesperson for all Native people. I'm just sharing resources that I find valuable, and I would like to share that again with you all. Some of the information that I will be sharing may be a little triggersome. So I just want to let you guys know that in the next slides, I will be talking about cultural assumption. But again, this is a safe place. And so I'm just wanting to, again, provide resources and awareness about Native identity and that whole concept of that sense of belonging. So this guide right here, Seeing Our Native Students, a guide for educators. When I discovered this, it's like a holy grail for me because everything that I talk about, that I've preached about or had conversations with, it was all put together in this guide just so nicely. And I am sharing it with everyone, Native, non-Native. It was written by a Redbud resource group in partnership with the Four Winds of Indian Education Educator Inc. Again, the link is being provided. You can download the PDF, print it out if you would like or not. You can purchase the book itself, as I did, and they have posters as well. So I can't hype them enough because it is just so handy. I'm going to read a little bit of their introduction for you all. As it reads, I once asked a fellow educator about reforming parts of our school to better reflect the cultural needs of local Native and Indigenous students. Without missing a beat, my colleague responded that unfortunately, the school did not have any Native students in it. Perhaps, I said, it isn't that Native students don't attend this school, it's that you don't see them. And sure enough, there were multiple Native students in the classes that I taught this year. After I mentioned to my colleague that I had Native students in my class, they flooded me with statements about Native people and culture. They told me that my students probably had connections to the local casino. They also claimed my students received benefits from the US government. All the while, they assured me they had the utmost respect for Native culture. And when I read this, I was just like, wow, that is exactly what I go through in my work sometimes. When I go to high schools or when I talk to schools, they are often, they don't know who their Native students are. Sometimes they having to pull reports and then calling them out, and I've had experiences where they did call a student out and they're like, oh yeah, we have so-and-so, right? And they talk to the student and then they come back and tell me that, oh, sorry, they said they're not Native. I'm like, oh, shoot, okay, or I've even spoken to students myself when I was visiting high schools, reviewing transcripts, talking about college, those types of things, at a school where they knew their Native students. And this student in particular didn't want to waste my time and pretty much just said, I'm not Native. I don't know why I'm on that list. It was a mistake, stuff like that. And that's fine. If she doesn't want to talk to me, I'm not going to hold her, to sit here. But then when I told the counselor this information, the counselor was like, what? Like, their parent is from such and such tribe. But I go, well, I don't know, maybe, there's multiple factors behind why this student did not want to identify with being Native, right? And which I'm going to talk more about. So covering some cultural assumptions, this whole idea of blood quantum, right? And I'm pulling these images from this guide in here, so you're getting a little quick glimpse of it. So they have the concept, they have the misconception, the reality, things not to say, right? So blood quantum, that only full blood natives are really native. When in reality, we know that's not true. And so things that you should avoid saying to your native students, native families, native colleagues is questions like, what percentage are you, etc., right? The other concept of tribal enrollment, that all natives belong to a tribe, or they have to be enrolled. If they're not enrolled, they're not native, you know. We know that, again, is not true, that some native students are enrolled and some are not. I see that often in my work as well. And I don't discriminate, you know, whether you know your tribe, you don't, you're enrolled or not. I will work with all native students, right? So again, things to avoid asking questions of what your membership status is. Are you a tribal member? You know, we just don't want to say those types of things. The other concept of looking native, students may feel that they don't look native enough, right? These old traditional textbook images that you're not going to find students like sitting like this in your classrooms, right? So we don't look native enough. So if I don't look like that, then I don't want to say that I am, you know. Again, saying things like, well, you don't look native enough. You just want to refrain from saying those type of languages to our youth. The other concept of being traditional, practicing traditional customs or not, being in ceremonies or powwows that, well, if you're native, you must dance in powwows, and you know, you must participate in ceremonies. And it's like, well, not every student will. Some other factors behind native identity would be unsure. A student may be unsure if they're even native. Could be that they don't know their tribe. Could be that, well, my grandparent was blank tribe, but they're still unsure. Being disconnected within your tribe, being disenrolled from your tribe, as long as being mixed race, that census application, school application, college application, which box do I check off? How do I identify, right? Not being enrolled yet, so that enrollment still pending, and them just thinking that am I native still, or you know, going back out of state natives as well. Their tribe could be from out of state and they're living here. So that disconnect, the whole idea of blood quantum, again, having to prove documentation, having to prove enrollment, not looking native enough, being the only native student in your classroom or school. I mean, I could speak to that as, if I'm the only one that I think, why am I going to be the spokesperson, right? That comes into being the spokesperson for all native people, because you're not sure if you're native, or all these other factors come into play, and then being traditional or non-traditional. And so just some of these factors can also present challenges within one's self-esteem, one student in that classroom, let's say, or in that school, and that can also affect the confidence in the learning space of your school or your classroom. So just think, as you have a class of 30 or 25 or 40, that, oh, I don't have native students. It's not that you can't see them, but it's just that there's so many other factors, right? And every native student is different. But with all of this, because educators are in positions of power, it is important to double check that we do not carry these assumptions with us into our work, right? So on top of those multiple factors, there's also that lateral violence of not being native enough. And we see this within our native communities. We see this also in our native tribes, or multiple tribes if they have. We see this in our families as well, you know, and it's still present, that again, that all natives should do powwow, that all natives should look a certain way, that all natives are enrolled or have a casino, et cetera, right? What we've come to find is that that's not reality. It's not reality for us. And often, you know, it's just understanding who and where you are serving, right? So again, I'm just going to reference this guide here for you. Check it out, read through it. There's also a teacher's tool belt guide for you that you can use to enhance your classroom and things like that, as well as the cultural assumptions. So I can't express how much love I have to give to this organization for putting that work on. That concludes my presentation. I know it was a little quick, but again, if you have any questions, feel free to email me. I am welcome to talking with people. If you want to set up a Zoom link, anything like that, you're welcome to reach out to me. Michkes, thank you.
Amazing job, Amber. Ruben.
Yeah, let me just get set up here and get going. Yeah, great job, Amber. Great job, Amber. And I'm gonna pick up a little bit, you know, somewhere where pieces where Amber left off too. So we'll have some cross-cutting themes here too. Again, my name is Reuben Garcia. I'm a member of the Manchester Point Arena Pomo tribe in Northern California, where I grew up there for till about high school, and then came down to Fresno, and been here for ever since. So I've been here for some time, and these 5 frames here are just a little bit about me. That roundhouse there is a ceremonial ground and over on our rancheria in Northern California, and then my family there. I have lots of family here in Fresno, and I also have family still on the Rancheria reservation up north. And then one thing I love is the coast. Right where I grew up at is our rancheria is maybe about 3 miles from the ocean. So just a short drive away, 5 minutes, and you're right at the beach. So I love that beautiful scene there, just seeing that. I'm also a student at Fresno State right now, working on my bachelor's in social work. So I'm in the social work program right now, just about closing in on my 2nd semester. So I'm really proud of that. And another thing too is I've been working with the Fresno American Indian Health Project, which is really close actually to Fresno State here. We're right across the street, almost right on Shaw. So very close. And like in my introduction there, a lot of my early work was really just coming in and looking at, you know, mental health and stigma, and how it was in our Native community. And a big project that the FAIHP took on was a circles of care and a system of care project that really looked at assessing community needs and assessing access to services here. And that was really how we got kickstarted and found out and collected a lot of data, surveyed a lot of tribes. And so in that survey, just to share a little bit about the diversity, I think we recorded over 100 different tribes that had took the survey here in Fresno. So it's a very intertribal community that we're in. And I just like to always acknowledge that, because, you know, we have so many different representations here in the Valley. And, you know, again, with my recent work, really looking at education for Native students and how we approach that. I'm going to talk a little bit about that, and then some of the work that we're doing as far as like the healing aspect for our teens in the Valley here for the past 9 years. It's going to be. So early on, again, this is a picture from the Carlisle Indian boarding school. So this is kind of boarding school experiences, early experiences for Native communities, and how, you know, this assimilation, you know, it was assimilation tactic for the government and the relationship with the tribes. So during this time, you know, of course, I'm going to be talking a little too, just like Amber had mentioned, there are things that might be sensitive and triggering. So just a heads up. But this is, you know, some of the history and historical things that have impacted Native communities. And one of the things that, we really look at is, and I'll be talking a little bit about too, is historical traumas. And there's so many, historical traumas that then turn into intergenerational traumas. And, one aspect of historical trauma is the boarding school experiences, although there's many others, as far as like extermination acts and eradication of different tribes and throughout the country. And that's been, the experience of the Native people. So I thought this picture was appropriate here just to show, like, this is the student body at Carlisle. And really the goal for this was really trying to, come in and quote unquote civilize, the Native children, and to create, more productive members there. So with that experience though, however, there was again a lot of historical trauma, a lot of abuse. Part of what was a part of that process was really coming in and taking children from their families, from their home, from their ancestral lands, and taking them to these schools that were far away from home, really uprooting them from their families, their traditions, their language. Any kind of tribal influence was taken. The children's hair was cut, and then they were no longer allowed to speak their languages, and they were learning the trades in the language of English and these things. So that was a very traumatic time, and it is really a lot. A lot of issues and challenges still root and stem from that. So some of the things that we heard from Amber's presentation of like not knowing, their tribe, being disconnected from their culture, not knowing their language, maybe not being traditional, maybe having to have been relocated. A lot of these things and a lot of these losses have stemmed from these eras, and they still continue. And that's, that's some of the things that we see, these identity crises that happen with these, with our youth. And here, there's an article by Les Whitbeck, and he talks about conceptualizing and measuring historical trauma in American Indian people. And, on the left here, it talks about, the losses that's there. And, again, the loss of land, language, spiritual ways, family ties, all these things that really contribute to what's on the right side there, the responses, or sometimes what I will call the symptoms, the symptoms of that and the responses to these losses. So on that side, we see things like depression, anxiety, loss of concentration, isolation, all these things that we experience as Native people. And I say we because, I've experienced these as well. And I know that it's something, that as Native people that we continue to heal from as individuals and as communities. Again, so here's, again, symptoms to those responses. This is symptoms and responses to those losses. So, this article is really great. I suggest a read just to kind of, put that into context, what historical trauma, the symptoms of it, because a lot of times historical trauma can be looked at as sometimes quote unquote, oh, that happened in the past. Yet, there's studies and studies and evidence that have showed and continue to come out and show the effects of those things. And, and here's some with the percentages showing of those who participated in this study that showed when they feel these symptoms, from things like often feeling sadness and depression, often feeling anger, anxiety, nervousness, uncomfortable around white people when they think about these losses. So inferiority, shame when you don't think of these, or shame when you think of these losses. And, it's really these things that we see in our communities, we see in our students, we see in our youth, and that we start to look at how do we address these things? How do we start the healing process within this? And a big way, that the Health Project does that is really incorporating a lot of cultural resources or cultural services that really are rooted in healing practices. So when we hear these traumas and we hear these experiences, and we think about our communities, there's an intersection of loss, healing, and reconciliation that for our youth and community that really needs to happen. So, it's these experiences that come that are brought in and that we carry, yet, it's not only the loss that, that we have experienced, but we're also experiencing the healing. And one of the things that we do at the Health Project here is we use a model and a curriculum called the Gathering of Native Americans, and that really starts to look at healing and looking at intergenerational trauma. And it's really a curriculum that was created to address the suicide that was happening, substance use, identity issues, and those types of things. And I'll get more into that too. So and then looking at this too, again, that Carlisle picture there, where some of that stems from that intergenerational trauma. And that picture there at the bottom, that's one of our camps. That's over 75 Native youth that's from here in Fresno, and who we've been working with. Some of them who now have aged up and are in their transitional age of early 20s right now, and doing good things in our community still. And so we're looking at that change from intergenerational trauma over to intergenerational healing, and how do we start that journey? And again, this curriculum and this camp has been very instrumental for us in how we are creating this change. So again, Gathering of Native Americans, the GONA for short. This curriculum was created by Native people and for Native people. And it's, it was elders and a team of substance misuse trainers and curriculum developers who came together with one thing in mind, and that was really to stay grounded in culture and to make sure that this was going to be the healing model for Native people. So that's a little background. And then this intervention, I guess we can call it, is what it's a camp. We usually use this as a camp. And there's four concepts that we stick to. And ours, we've been fortunate enough here at the Fresno American Indian Health Project to be able to offer a 5-day camp, and this is all free for Native youth to come and learn and experience, these four powerful concepts here. And when we come in on that first day and we look at that day, and that day is belonging. And that first day represents infancy and childhood. So really coming in and looking at, and it's also a time that we need to know how we belong. So even as Native people from the Valley coming into this camp on that day one, they all have different walks, they all have different backgrounds, they all have different histories, or maybe some don't know their histories, or some don't know, their traditions and culture. And we spend the day, really getting to know one another, doing exercises and team building to, let this sense of belonging really illuminate them, because it's really about building that trust coming in and gaining that trust, and really starting to work with them to understand that as Native people, we need to really look at some of the challenges that our communities face. And that's what, that day the mastery is really about empowerment for the individual and for our community. But when we get into that second day, our first component that we really look at is historical trauma, some of the challenges that, we see, again, going back to those losses and how they're affecting and impacting our communities. So once we start to look at that begins conversation about, okay, how, now that we know this, and it's not about what's wrong with us or what's wrong with our communities, what has happened to our communities, what has happened to our people. And that really starts to look at and change the conversation, change that conversation, and move into that visioning, right? A healthy visioning, and looking into how do we change these conversations now and start to look at our future? What do we want for our future? How do we bring back our culture? How do we bring back our languages? How do we revitalize our culture and cultural ceremonies? And looking at this identity that we have, and then moving into that third day of interdependence, that's really looking at how are we going to put this to action? Now that we understand we're moving through this healing journey and process, what is our action to commit? How are we going to commit to these things that we want to see and these changes in our community? And that really is a really pivotal day, because once we hit that third day, we move on from that trauma, we move on from that, and we start to move into that resiliency and solution-based thinking. and to that generosity piece on how do we give back? How do we give back to our communities? How do we start to maintain and sustain this wellness for ourselves and community? So that's kind of the outline there. And then we also we're fortunate enough to have this clinical crosswalk that really shows the therapeutic value of what happens at our camp and throughout these 4 days. So the other thing too is, it's really a holistic approach to wellness, and, really establishing that sense of identity, gaining our social skills, building those, our team building, communication. And I know one thing Amber too brought up was that self-esteem, right? And what we see here in that belonging, that day one, is that's what things that we're working on, is building that self-esteem, building that energy to really be prideful of who they are and be able to, address some of the things that they may need to. Mastery, again, is strength-based. We really focus on that resiliency factor. And then it's really about group process and learning from one another and peer support. And then interdependence, team building skills, problem solving skills, community connections. And then also generosity is about health promotion. How are we going to move that forward into our communities? So I know I had a few more slides. What I want to do is jump over to our outcomes, some of the things that we're seeing happening. And really, we do have an evaluation process. We do stick to a fidelity. And that way, when we go through our camps, now it's going to be 9 years. We did a virtual last year. We're planning to do a virtual this year. And we stick to a fidelity that really kind of standardize, the activities that we're doing to make sure that we're getting, make sure that we're doing activities that are going to raise self-esteem, make sure that they learn their culture, feel connected to their peers and community. And we've been doing this evaluation for some time now. And this is some of the outcomes that we've seen for the first couple of years in 2012 and 14, cross-site from Fresno and Oakland. So looking at that belonging, cultural identity really increases hope for the future, which is key for suicide prevention, which is key for also cultural identity. And then, each of these components, belonging, mastery, interdependence, generosity, all have these different outcomes that we work towards throughout this week. So again, we're really working with our youth just to overcome those traumas and really move into historical and intergenerational healing. And here's again that picture there. And in that picture, again, about 75 youth, 20 tribes represented just amongst themselves. So 25 nations there from here in Fresno. And these are our youth, the leaders that we're working with. So, and we're continuing to work with. And so then in the chat there is the website for FAHP. There's quite a bit of things that are happening here. We have a lot of behavioral health services, family services, youth services. We just recently opened medical services. So, we're really sticking true to that system of care for our Native community and continuing to do this work. So again, thank you for your time and sharing space with such great people.
Thank you so much, Ruben. Wonderful job. Thank you.
Can y'all see my PowerPoint or calendar?
PowerPoint.
Yeah.
Cool. Sounds like a plan. All right, everyone. First and foremost, I want to thank Dr. Lopez, Dr. Henderson, and the rest of the team for holding this very important space. I want to start out by, I want to share my presentation through storytelling. Therefore, I identify as a Latino, Mexicano, Mexican-American. I also identify as a gay man. So it's important to note that my experiences as a Latino gay man might be more than likely different than someone who identifies as a transgender Black woman, as a bisexual man, and so on, okay? So who am I? My name is Esteban Parra Guerrero. Soy hijo de Esteban Parra y Magdalena Guerrero. My pronouns are he, him, his. In the early 80s, my parents decided to relocate from Mexico to South Central Los Angeles, where they had 11 beautiful children, including, me right here. Growing up in South Central, going to the K-12 school system, I experienced so much microaggressions, so much homophobia and racism. Question number one, and you don't have to drop it in the chat box to you, but how many of you have heard the following phrase or have used it? That is so gay. Okay, and just think of the long-term effects that it cost people like me, growing up as a kid and not showing my true colors because I was afraid. Bullying was experienced in my household and also at school. I never forget my second grade, sorry. I was running because I was gonna get my butt kicked by two kids and they were calling me the F word and, gay. So I ran up to Mrs. Alvarez and I said, Mrs. Alvarez, they're trying to kick my butt. And she asked, well, why is that? And I said, well, they're saying that I'm gay. And she laughed and said, well, are you? So fast forward to my junior year in high school. My parents decided to relocate from South Central LA to Porterville here in the Central Valley. And I honestly was not ready for higher education. I was going with the flow. And I'll never forget that the first institution I was accepted to was San Francisco State University. So I went up to my dad and I said, Papá, me aceptaron a la escuela de San Francisco. They accepted me. And he said, estás loco. You're not going that far away from home. So to be honest with you all, Fresno State was my ticket to freedom because I was still hiding my true self. And things didn't get better, right? I mean, in 2008, we didn't have this current role as a coordinator of LGBTQ+. We didn't have many resources that we have now available at Fresno State. My freshman year, as a freshman at Fresno State, in 2008, I had an experience where I needed to go to the Student Health and Counseling Center. And I went into the room and the doctor asked me, what are you here for? And I'm like, you know what? To be honest, I'm here for an HIV test. And she snapped at me. She said that was disgusting. I'm not gonna apologize for getting emotional. It still hurts, right? She said that sex was between a man and a woman, and marriage was between a man and a woman. So fast forward, after 7 years, almost 7 years, I graduated with my business degree. And now when I reflect back, I think of what played a role on that, taking that long. I mean, I already shared earlier that I wasn't ready for higher ed, but also the lack of space, feeling a sense of belonging and representation also played a role. I landed my first job working for a Fortune 500 company in management. And June 12 happened, June 12, 2016, where the Pulse shooting took place, right? Where over 45 of my brothers and sisters who identify as part of the LGBTQ+ community were murdered. No one cared to ask. No one cared to ask how I was feeling and whether people knew or not that I was gay or not. No one even acknowledged that incident had taken place. So my question to you, to everyone, the next day when that happened, that incident, who did you reach out to check in? Did you hold a space for your students? For your coworkers? Fast forward, I couldn't live my life thinking that my brothers and sisters in South Central LA, who were predominantly Latino, Latinas, and African American Black, were left behind because of the way this school system was built. So I wanted to go back for a master's, and my goal was to teach at a junior college, part-time. But after being accepted to the master's program in higher education leadership, I wanted to commit to education 100%. So fast forward, thanks to one of my mentors, Dr. Francino Puta, who's here today. Now I am here in a better place, happier, working for the Cross Cultural and Gender Center as the LGBTQ+ Programs and Services Coordinator, and also as the Gender Programs and Services Coordinator. And like Dr. Henderson mentioned, I support the Men's Success Initiative at the Fresno State Cross Cultural and Gender Center. So before we get to the center and what we do, what I do there, let's talk about why it matters. You know, research indicates that at least 1 in 10 people identifies as LGBTQ+. My question is, are you an ally? For those who identify as an ally and claim not to know anyone who identifies as part of the LGBTQ+ community, really ask yourself, what are you saying out loud that's hurting your friends to come out to you, to show their true colors? Okay, we're all over the place. In 2018, 130 anti-LGBTQ bills were introduced in 30 USA states. So when I read numbers like this, first impressions, right? Does half of this country that I was born, are they against me and my people? What's going on here? 40% of LGBTQ youth seriously consider suicide in the past year. This survey was conducted with 40,000 people who identify as LGBTQ from ages 13 to 24. And within the same survey, 68% of the respondents reported symptoms of generalized anxiety disorder, 55% reported symptoms of major depressive disorder, and 48% reported engaging in self-harm. Additionally, LGB youth are almost 5 times as likely to have attempted suicide compared to heterosexual youth. And lastly, more than 50% of transgender youth and adults seriously consider suicide each year. Below you see a map, and quote, at least 69 countries have national laws criminalizing same-sex relations between consenting adults. Side note, my partner and I Google when we're about to travel, when we're about to purchase our next tickets for our next adventure, if we're welcome there. Another side note, I lived in Fresno since 2008. I've been dating my partner for almost 6 years. I've never held his hand in public here in Fresno. So, who we are, cross-culture and gender-centered. And Dr. Aputa, please check me if I'm wrong. She's here, so I'm a little bit nervous. I'm kidding, I love Dr. Aputa. In 1990, the center was actually founded as a women's resource center. And again, the original Dr. Aputa was there. And then in 2015, it was converted into the cross-culture and gender center. So some of the challenges that we face, right, or I'll speak for myself from the LGBTQ coordinator standpoint, the lack of space, right, and funding. Many other CSUs have their own LGBTQ center, right? And so just a little bit of what I do here as the coordinator of LGBTQ plus programs and services. We obviously have many events, programs to pretty much educate our community to fight against transphobia, homophobia, racism, and other forms of isms. We also collaborate with other departments and community organizations to work together to make Fresno State a more inclusive and welcoming space for everyone. And of course, we support annual events that are hosted by community members, such as Trans Emotion. For example, the Transgender Day of Remembrance, which is hosted every year, November 20th, and essentially is a space to remember our transgender brothers and sisters who were murdered due to transphobia. We also work with Fresno State LGBT Faculty and Staff Allies Network to have, for example, our rainbow graduation. In 2 weeks, 3 weeks, we'll be having our 8th celebration. And recently, we had a training developed for our faculty and staff on the importance of pronouns, gender pronouns. And this was supported by our former president, now Chancellor Castro. As we're speaking about healing circles and discussion groups, we do have, if you looked at the screen, each group, each affinity group has its own space. The LGBTQ discussion group is held every Thursday at noon, and it's really informal. I mean, students and some faculty have swing by and staff, and we just do a check-in. How are you doing? What did you experience? Was it good or bad? But most importantly, how can we support you? And we provide them with the resources needed. This semester alone, we offered over 60 virtual programs combined together as a center. Okay, so there's 5 full-time staff And then we have about 9 student coordinators who we really value. Together, we rolled out over 60 racial programs, 15 of them being under gender, LGBTQ, and men's success initiatives. So real quick, we do a lot of assessment for each program, and I'll just read the first one from one of our students. Quote, "I love how this presentation felt and how informational it was. It gave me a lot of confidence and inspiration in further discovering my sexuality and also allowing me to use correct terms and vocabulary when speaking." And right here, we have some resources. Of course, you have us. We'll welcome you with open arms. Cross Culture and Gender Center. We have the Gender and Sexualities Alliance GSA network, which I'll talk more about that. Well, actually, GSA for short is a student-run organizations that unite LGBTQ and allied youth to build community and organize around issues impacting them in their communities and schools. And of course, these are our community resources. We have the Parents, Families, and Friends of Lesbians and Gays, PFLAG, Trans Emotion, and The Source and Visalia, and many, many more. If you follow us on social media, there's a list of all the resources available for our students and community. So recommendations. We have Pride Month, right? June. Again, the leaders who are here today, what are you doing to celebrate our students? Now I get it, right? We're quick to come up with excuses. Well, you know, it's summertime, our students are not enrolled. Perfect. We have LGBT History Month in October, which was founded in 1994 by a high school teacher who was fired for coming out to his students. We also have October 11th Coming Out Day, Transgender Visibility, March 31st. So again, my question, are you an ally, right? Where is your flag, your pride flag? Where's your transgender flag? Visuals matter, right? Where are your pronouns? I send a lot of emails, unfortunately. I'm that annoying Fresno State employee who sends a lot of emails because I want people to support and come learn with us. Next to my signature, there's my pronouns, and there's a hyperlink where it will lead you to a short article to read about the importance of pronouns. In the state of California, there's 900 GSAs, right? As I shared earlier, these are clubs that are available at middle schools and high schools. However, there's over 3,000 middle school and high schools combined. And these are the 3,000 is not including charter schools. So I'm saying that to say that there's a lot of opportunity there, especially for our middle school and high school teachers who are here today to start your own club. And I believe Glad is gonna drop the link right now. It's a simple form. You can become an advisor, or if there's a chapter that already exists, a club, check in once in a while. What do these students need? How can we support them? My personal recommendation, well, first of all, don't out anyone, right? Continue learning. But you're gonna come across people who are not ready to learn or unlearn, right? My advice to those people, when you have an LGBTQ student or colleague who's reaching out to you for support, and if you can't support them because of your faith or belief, the least you could do is send it to the right person, the right office, because we cannot afford suicide rates going higher as we speak. With that being said, I encourage you all to live and let live. Thank you.
Esteban. Christelle, I think if you just, you and Adrian just unmute, I think you should be able to take on the screen.
Oh, thank you. I would like to make space for Adrian to go first.
Okay. Thank you, Christelle. Okay, I was not ready. I had a very long day outside working. I have a new job, so I need to recenter myself. I unfortunately don't have a visual, but my name is Adrian. My pronouns are she, her, they, them. I am the co-founder and program director of the Expressarte Cultural Wellness Collective. And we are a somewhat new organization, about 2 years old at this point, based out of Tulare County / Fresno County. I myself out of Fresno, or Yokutland, and Christelle, my co-founder, out of Tulare County. But we do look to serve the entirety of the San Joaquin Valley when it comes to mental health awareness, and equity and accessibility in mental health. So a little bit about myself. I am originally from the Coachella Valley. It's about 5 hours south and east of here. And it's both very different and very similar for many reasons. I am the daughter of a teen mom, a Chicana mom, and I myself identify as mixed race. So from the very beginning, I have been like a change maker, at least according to my mom. I always have been, was very active growing up and trying to like, I was always doing something basically growing up. And then I went off to college, and that's really where my activism kind of started off. I started off at UC Davis, and unfortunately, due to both the cost of school, but also untreated mental illness, was not able to continue, was actually pushed out of campus. And in the whole process of me exiting UC Davis and transitioning to a different, I guess, life, I didn't have the language per se until I like came here to the Central Valley and actually started doing community organizing of what had actually happened while I was there. So I fully understand that I myself am white passing. However, am still, my last name still ends in Z, as my mom likes to say. And the academic systems that are in place are definitely not there to have first generation students, BIPOC students, queer transgender students on campus. These systems like literally were not made for us to succeed in the UC system, especially, and especially when it comes to students who are neurodivergent or chronically ill or disabled. It was very hard to even advocate for myself for the fact that like, even as an anxious or depressed student, like it's very hard to advocate for yourself to do well in that sort of like rigorous academic environment. And so I kind of just gave up on academics and moved out to the Central Valley in 2016, a little bit more aware of what mental health and its importance meant. And the 2016 was definitely an interesting time to move to the Central Valley, especially coming from SoCal and then UC Davis, generally more liberal areas, and not really knowing much about where I was moving to. I literally woke up and was like, where are all these Trump signs from? Like, where were these when I drove in last night? And so I became very involved in the community after the election and kind of dove headfirst into community organizing with a reproductive justice framework and organization based out of Visalia that taught me and gave me so many opportunities to better myself and actually jump back into school. But it also exposed me to a lot of toxicity that is prevalent in organizing spaces across the Central Valley, and not just across the Central Valley, but also across the world. Being in the community is tiring and you will burn out if you do not take care of yourself. And it was something that I had to learn the hard way. I was working at this reproductive justice organization, interning with the ACLU, and also having a full-time coursework at College of the Sequoias, and also working at the Welcome Center on campus. And everything kind of came to a halt when I was diagnosed with cancer. And I basically, everything had to stop and everything had to be focused on my health. And I was still trying my best to be this like really productive community organizer and like really still contributing, but like my capacity and my wants to be productive and what people were expecting of me as a cancer patient were not meeting up. And that's what we like to call ableism. So I was experiencing that firsthand, and from not just from like coworkers, but also like professors and like students. And that introduced me to transformative justice frameworks that were created by Black and brown disabled queer folks. It's a way to look at systems of oppression as ways of looking at it in like harm and analyzing harm and accountability as symptoms of these systems of oppression. So I learned a lot of what I know now from like the Bay Area Transformative Justice Collective, folks like Mia Mingus, as well as people just that I've met and am still in community with, that hold themselves to a certain standard that doesn't necessarily specifically outright call it transformative justice, but as a student of abolition and a student of transformative justice, I can pinpoint that and say that's transformative justice. And so a year later, after leaving the organization, going back to school, moving to Fresno to be closer to my oncologists. Side note, I am in remission now. It's something that I have to constantly live with. That's a chronically ill person, but I am in remission. I just want to throw that out there. It's always something that's like questioned if I don't mention it right off the bat. But in 2019, Christelle reached out to me asking if we wanted to co-create this our own space, basically, that focuses on sustainable organizing, healing, community care, and that eventually became Expressarte Cultural Wellness Collective. So we focus on mental health awareness through a transformative justice lens, and we advocate for abolition. And abolition is a scary word at first, right? Very much associated with just like tearing things down the way they are now, when in fact it is so much more than that, and actually is rooted very much in community practice, community love, community care, and building up different systems that actually work for the people who are most affected by systemic oppression and social inequities. So some of the things that we do are currently doing are we have a fellowship coming up that is specifically for licensed and unlicensed therapists of color, and so BIPOC also. So the stat, I believe, is about 86% of psychologists and therapists are white men. And when you are a person of color or a queer person trying to seek care and mental health care in a system that is predominantly white, predominantly cishet men, that doesn't always work out right. And then the traditional talk therapy and psychology also does not work for everybody. And so what we are hoping to do, because this is actually the first year that we're going to be implementing this program, thanks to funding from the Latino Community Foundation, is basically taking folks who are from the Central Valley, will stay in the Central Valley because we do have a problem with brain drain out here, and training them basically to decolonize their therapy practices, and ensuring that folks who are in need of mental health care are getting it from people that we can trust, and are capable and understand what it's like to live in a white supremacist society and how that affects your mental health and shows up past that and it starts to affect your physical health. I think both Ruben and Amber mentioned the effects that racism and like the trauma it causes. And I don't know if Ruben actually named it specifically, but the study is called epigenetics. And there are studies shown on how the stress hormone rewires your DNA. Cortisol is super damaging and is passed down generation to generation. And what we're doing is hoping to stop those cycles, stop those intergenerational curses that have been forced upon us. And that is what we do. So I'm going to give the floor to my co-founder and partner in crime, Christelle.
Oh my God, I love you so much, Adrienne. Baby just woke up from a nap. My name is Christelle, Christelle Cortez Servin. My pronouns are she, they, them. I am here taking space as a survivor of child sexual abuse. I identify as queer, super gay, and the Central Valley welcomed me almost 7 years ago. Surviving and growing up and surviving in Mexico, I think really opened my eyes and my awareness to a multiverse and a multi-layer of different forms of harm that have now transformed into different forms of love. And this is when I really like held Esteban so closely, you know, when the emotions and the tear and the liberation of those feelings, you know, start coming through and manifesting through your body, because that lateral love that I learned came from my community, came from grassroots organizers, came from the storytellers of my community. And it is because of them that I am here today, sharing a space with you all. Like the Central Valley is one of the most healing places that I've ever had the opportunity to be part of, to belong, and to see how beautiful communities of color can thrive when liberating ourselves from shame and breaking silence, right? Because from what I learned as an immigrant is that in trying to being forced to assimilate Western culture, that immediately puts you in an isolated place. And that immediately takes you to tapping back into the toxic survival mechanisms that help you get by while surviving. And that's exactly, what happened to me. I definitely, I started drinking more. Drinking is something that there is a coping mechanism. It's an intergenerational coping mechanism in my family. So that was the easiest way for me to dissociate from my own body and my own mind, because there were multiple times and occasions when I didn't want to be in my body as I was processing my new existence in this occupied land that we call the Central Valley. And I, after trying really hard to to assimilate a culture that is not even mine, and understanding, you know, these super expensive and complicated language that English is, I immediately started seeking out to community, and Goshen was that first introduction. In sharing my story with the women from Goshen who were in this super cute group called Bailoterapia, because they started dancing, and dancing is a form of liberation for me too. So I immediately connected with them. And they were like, oh, well, we were told that we need to be certified as Zumba instructors to just enjoy ourselves and our bodies. And we say, screw that. We're just going to call it bailoterapia, period, and just do our own thing. And that right there, that moment was like so liberating, right? Because we take the agency of our lives, what makes us happy, joy, and that those moments were definitely the ones that helped me to stay rooted in community, rooted in culture, so that I don't forget who I am. And that sense of belonging, right, starts in my body, so that I belong in my body. And I can have the agency to even, you know, express who has access to my body. And that, you know, like, in seeing the emerging leaders, the emerging organizers, the healers, the practitioners, the Esteban, the Adrians, the Rubens, the Ambers, the Dr. Lopez, the Dr. Hendersons of the world, in sharing, you know, those stories and the parallels that we can draw when opening up, when stepping into vulnerability, that is what really called me. And, you know, those parallels that connect Adrian and I to co-create Expressarte, to make sure that, you know, the community could, in their own words, at their own pace, without pressure, without rush, without urgency, just coming to their own, like stepping to their power, and start the journey of self-discovery. Because that journey, I know that it sounds super sweet and it could be like over romanticized. It's really hard. It's really hard because you go deeper and deeper and deeper and deeper into those profound intergenerational wounds that at some point, you know, when you are like learning and developing less destructive coping mechanisms, like it's like putting on a Band-Aid, right? And when you don't let the wound breathe, it can go like rotten, right? So going deeper and deeper and deeper into these intergenerational wounds and like self-discovery, I started, you know, like developing the language to actually share who I am. And this is the question that I keep going back and forth, like, who am I? You know, like I am the daughter of Claudia and Ramon. I am the granddaughter of Jose and Trinidad and Agripina and Roberto. And my family has a huge history of being displaced, pushed away from the land, gun violence, shame, rape, and yet, like all of us, as you know, in together in those moments of like intimacy that we have co-created together, we are brave and vulnerable to look at each other and understand that we are in that ongoing journey together. So so that's pretty much at the heart of Expressarte, and sharing the same, you know, like healing practices that have been shared with us, that in this case, and I really want to remember, and I don't want to forget that the first pieces of like a strong literature that started to inform me and like help me construct, my own experience where Black, disabled, queer authors, writers, survivors, and really elevating that aspect, because it is, again, thanks to my community and the ancestors that took care of this land, that I am standing here, like literally, because I was going through my Instagram as well and just like trying to remember the picture that my partner took when I was ready, like I was enjoying what I thought it was the last day of my life, because I was super ready just to kill myself, and going through, like the multi-layer, super complicated process of understanding who am I. The moment that, and what changed is that my partner, like, immediately started to develop that like awareness of like what is happening, and like the disassociating myself is just like, okay, let's talk. And in that talking and that moment of vulnerability, the need to seek support from a therapist was, voiced in that moment, and I name it, which it was like, whew, moment of like bravery, because mental health is very stigmatized in Mexican culture. Like, estamos locos, si vamos al psicólogo es porque estás loco. So that moment, the ability to have access to a mental health provider that spoke my language, that was aware of my surroundings, that was familiar with the culture, truly, changed and saved my life. And it took time, and it was a process, right? Because I had an entire community like truly reminded me who I am. So with that, I really would like to, share this love back with you all, and a moment of gratitude, collective gratitude and collective love. Thank you, Adrian. Thank you, everyone in this panel, for making the space and sharing your stories. And for those who are interested, please tap into our resources, Expresarte Cultural Wellness Collective.org. Thank you.
Thank you, Christelle. I just want us to just kind of have a moment. Let's exhale. Let's get some water. Dr. Henderson, I'm going to hand it over to you to bring us into Q&A, if that's okay.
Absolutely. Before we jump into Q&A, I was thinking of a way to bring us into the question and answer space. And I just want to take some time to kind of highlight key points from everybody who shared. Amber, you talked about blood quant, and you also talked about not looking Native enough, right? And when we talk about trauma, how might that impact one's psyche when someone says that you don't look Native enough, or the blood that your ancestors had spilled is not good enough, right? Reuben, you dropped some knowledge and some wisdom on us. Assimilation tactic, and so, again, messaging of us not being good enough. So we have to assimilate, right? We have to join up. We have to strip ourselves of who we are. And so I thank you, and also thank the symbolism, the picture that you shared, right? The school versus what we have now, or what you're doing now. I thought that was a blessing. It was a blessing to see. Thank you for that. Esteban, I want to lift up your tears, brother. You know what I mean? I heard that pain come through, right? And I definitely want to lift up those tears. And and the boldness and you being courageous to share your lived experiences. And that's the thing with trauma and with pain, right? Everybody's experiencing pain in these silos. And the way that we truly heal is we're able to kind of put language to it and come together. So I want to lift up your tears, good brother. I appreciate you for sharing what you shared. Lastly, Adrian and Christelle, I really felt Adrian, when you talked about being marginalized, right? And being marginalized a one then more identity, right? And we had a question about what does it mean to be white passing? That's one of the questions that I'm gonna pose to you and let you speak your truth. And Christelle, one of the most powerful things is that letting your wound breathe, right? We all know that oxygen is the key to life. And we also know that we juxtapose that with the need to breathe, right? And we have things like patriarchy, we have things like racism, we have things like white supremacy that are preventing us from breathing, thus enhancing the pain and the trauma. And lastly, just to kind of bring us full circle, in the academy, we use fancy words like trauma, right? What everybody on this panel talked about was pain, right? And one of the first components of healing, right, is being able to, one, be present for the pain, two, put language to the pain, right? Because we always have folks telling us that we did not feel what we know we felt, right? We didn't feel what we know we felt. And so I just want to thank y'all for sharing y'all truths. And so to the first question, and again, to the audience, I want to definitely encourage y'all to tap in with the chat. And for those who don't know, tap in again is urban vernacular for, to write your contributions in the chat as you see fit. And we're going to transition into some question and answer from my lovely panelists. And we're going to start with the first question, which is, and I believe this is from Haley. And Haley had a question about disenrollment from a tribe and enrolling in a tribe. And this question came through while Amber was speaking. So Amber or anyone else on the panel, if you could speak to what does it mean to disenroll and enroll in a tribe?
Right, so federally recognized tribes do have enrollment. In some tribes, they do use blood quantum as one of their requirements. Some don't. Some use land, a lot of family lineage. So who and where do you come from? And sometimes you can be disenrolled from your tribe that you were enrolled in, right? So when you're disenrolled, that also often has effect on a person if then are they native because they're not enrolled in their tribe, right? So that's where that came about. I don't know if Ruben wants to speak to that as well, but the idea of enrollment and having that proof of documentation has effect. So disenroll, enrolled, not yet enrolled, those types of things.
And Brother Ruben, anything to add?
Yeah, I think, I guess just like where that came about, is there was a, there was the Indian Reorganization Act. There was a lot of policies enacted that really impacted that to say, and really what was happening was the land base was being taken, and tribes are being relocated. And in that process, the government came down and wanted to have census rolls of the tribes. And these census rolls, were for different tribes. And to get on that census roll, you had to be there at the time. And this is what really led to that recognition. And a lot of times, tribes were left out. There's still to this day unratified treaties of the California tribes, and who are still fighting for recognition. And that's what it really came down to. And it's really that recognition and in relationship with the government that was early on. Yet there was a lot of, disadvantages for the tribes at the time. And now, we see it, and now it's a challenge in itself. For some, it might seem as hey, you have that recognition. But a lot of times there is, some of those cases that Amber's talking about is that lateral violence and lateral oppression that happens. So there's a lot of, systemic challenges to that, and a long history behind that. So.
Thank you, Brother Ruben and Sister Amber, for your wisdom on that. And I apologize, Zoom was talking to me. I thought that, something was going on. I was gonna give Zoom some of that smoke. So for the next question, it came up also when you were presenting, Adrian, and the question centered on what does white passing mean? What does white passing mean?
Yes, so I mean, you answered it very well. It means that you are perceived as white, your racial or ethnic identity is not questioned by other folks. So for myself, I identify as mixed race, and have white passing privilege because, to somebody who sees me, on the street, in the grocery store, as I am now, if I had not told you that I identify as mixed race, the assumption could have been easily made that I am just white. When, as a matter of fact, my mother is Chicana, my biological father is half Black and half white. So, well, yes, I am very, very light skinned and have that white ancestry. It is not all of what I am. And in the same vein of blood quantum that we were talking about earlier, there's such thing as like the one drop rule when it comes to the folks who were enslaved and trafficked during slavery, that if you were even just like, I think it was an eighth, I want to say, I can't remember, there's a specific
It's
number.
an eighth, 1/8.
1/8. Okay, so I would fall into that. It's like you, as long as you were 1/8 or more, you were considered Black and therefore lesser than and not deserving of the same privileges as white folks. So white passing, while is a sign of privilege when it comes to BIPOC folks, in like there is like still that lateral harm that was just mentioned. It is also a tool of white supremacy as well.
Thank you so much, Adrian. I appreciate your wisdom on that. From an anonymous attendee, and this is a phenomenal question as well. What does allyship mean exactly, and what can we do to make our allyship more explicit? And the way the question is framed, anyone from the panel can speak or all.
I can share, Dr. Henderson. First of all, I want to thank everyone for sharing some love in the chat box. I'm reading, but trying to control my anxiety and focus on my presentation. To me, allyship means meeting me halfway, right? And show up. Simple. There's different definitions, or people, depending on where they're standing in life or what they're struggling with, allyship may mean different to them. But to me, again, it's meeting me halfway. What I mean by that is, and I think Dr. Puda taught me this, do your homework before asking a question, right? Show us that you did your part on trying to, before you ask that question, you did your research and asking the right question. And again, how can you make it more explicit to me is showing up and being ready to learn.
Thank you, Esteban. We appreciate that wisdom, brother. Anybody else want to contribute?
I guess I could go on that one too. And I see in a different comment about supporting Indigenous students in my classroom, as well as being a non-native person. You can simply, putting the land acknowledgement in your syllabi, at the very top of that, and each semester, sharing that land acknowledgement, that alone is just one first step. I could tell you as a college student, when I was looking at these syllabi that I know as professors, you spend lots of time combining that information for that semester. I never seen that included. And now Fresno State, we do have our own land acknowledgement that, again, you are welcome to use and share. As I said, putting in your email signatures, as Esteban was sharing, putting your pronouns in your signatures or in your social media bios, those types of things, I think I've also seen as well as being an ally. So those are just some of the small things I think we can do as on our campus or within your other schools, future leaders, at high schools or middle schools, those types of things can be implemented there as well.
Thank you, Amber.
Yeah, thank you, Amber. Also just want to acknowledge from Facebook Live, since they're not here on Zoom, there's a comment who's just, I wanted to say thank you to Esteban and Christelle for sharing their stories. As Mexican gay immigrant, it makes me happy to see people that share similar experiences to mine, willing to help those who don't know where to find support. So I just want to acknowledge you, Trinidad. Thank you for that comment to our panelists. There's another question in here. If anyone wants to speak to what it means to be a survivor and why that term is so important to use.
Wow, that's a big question. Can you share with me again, Dr. Lopez, the first part of that question, please?
The question is, would our panelists be comfortable speaking more about what it means to be a survivor and just why the usage, why using that term in particular may be important to use?
Oof, I think I'm having a little bit of a hard time understanding where the question comes from, because why is it important to, like, I don't know if it's about identifying yourself as a survivor or why saying that you're a survivor, when the truth is that nobody is obligated to identify as a survivor. That is completely, as a survivor, that is your right. Your experience, you share your experience when you're ready. And even if you're ready, like, nobody really has the agency to like ask, like, tell me your survivor experience. And I am happy to follow up with some resources that can perhaps support, the understanding of the concept of the question and where the question comes from. At least that's, my opinion, my perspective.
Yeah, no, I think that's really, I think that was great. Thank you so much, Christelle.
And I think another piece of that is the language, because historically, when you refer to, you don't want to be victimized, right? And when you use the term, when you use terms like language matters. So the descriptor that you use, oftentimes we embody that, right? So historically, when we think about survivors, folks that are warriors, folks that press through, in addition to honoring their pain and lived experiences. So to my understanding, that is another distinction with, with some of the language wrapped around that there.
Absolutely.
So
Can I grab the next one? Yeah, go ahead, Dr. Anderson.
For the next question, it would be, what does it mean to decolonize therapy practices? Can you give a sample or example, no, excuse me, can you give a simple explanation of what decolonization is?
I can take that question because I'm the one who mentioned it. So when we talk about decolonization, it's definitely stems from Indigenous folks in that community. So I want to pay homage to that and honor that. But when we talk about decolonization, we mean stripping away the societal expectations and systems that have been put in place because of colonization and imperialism from Europeans. So a lot of not a lot. The society we live in today is a direct product of colonization and white supremacy. And because of that, mental health practices in the entire medical industrial complex is white supremacist and ableist as hell. So when we talk about decolonization in mental health and in therapy, it's definitely a relationship building instead of a pathologizing of your patients. It's you're not just, patient number, blah, blah, blah. You're Adrian, you're Amber, you're Ruben, you're Esteban. And a lot of it also is making these things accessible, destigmatizing mental health to begin with. It's like, yes, expose that evilism. And a lot of what happens is that, psychology is very much taken in a lens of whiteness and does not acknowledge that psychology is different culture to culture to culture, and that the culture that's here in the United States is very different from what might be in like Peru or South Africa, but it's still touched by that white supremacy, but the culture is different. So therefore the psychology is different. And it's taking that consciousness and that competence of that consciousness and applying it to therapy practices, and not just saying like, how does that make you feel? Like, because it in itself is re-traumatizing, and having therapists that are aware of how to handle racial trauma, queer trauma, any of these traumas that come from existing as a marginalized person, living in between the intersections of these identities is super important. I mean, I was like, how many of us are in here? Seven or more in here have experienced some sort of trauma because of our identities, and have basically laid out what this can look like living in the Central Valley as like a marginalized person for all of y'all. And even that is reliving trauma. And so it's so important that folks understand what it means to address these things, and to be confidently aware and a confident ally, even, because your therapist doesn't have to be the same exact identity as you, right? They can identify differently, but still make the effort to understand what you're going through on a day-to-day basis. So that's the long, simple version of what that is. To give an example outside of what therapy is for decolonization, it's a practice. We can go on and on of what decolonization really means. It's a lot, and it's a practice, and it's a rejection of white supremacist thinking. It's growth. It's a lot. It's hard to pinpoint one good example when it's really readjusting your entire lifestyle.
And the only thing I would add to what Adrian said is being able to ask yourself, how connected are you to practices of colonizers, taking land, organizing institutions like voting, like the courts, so forth and so on. So you have these systems of these things that are in place that colonizers do. And so when you decolonize that, you're saying, okay, how can I make this more equitable? You know, how wedded am I to white supremacist thought, or how wedded are my practices in Eurocentric nature as it pertains to how do I look in therapy? Do I expect the client to just come in and disclose all the information, or do I work to build a relationship, right? And so, and how connected am I to some of those practices?
I think Ruben, you and Mike, did you want to add to that?
Yeah, I was just gonna say I appreciate the just the conversation and question, and one of the things for us that we talk about, because for us with our camp, we have behavioral health services, we do our community service, but just with our camp, one of the things that we focus on too is really understanding too that the solutions come from our communities and our individuals. And when we look at our healing models, for so long it's been the experts that come in and know what's right for us and know what the intervention will look like or what the practice will look like. However, for us, what we try to get back to is our cultural teachings and our traditional ways of healing. And these practices have been they have worked for centuries, since time immemorial. And one of the things for us is that decolonizing is getting back to our cultural ways and our traditional ways, because it's something that it's something that has been given to us as a community, but at the same time, it's really a very ancient way of healing. It's something that's been passed down through generation and generation, and for us, that decolonizing is really looking at how do we support that? How do we support that? How do we become the experts of our own communities, and looking to those who are going to support us in that way? And really, that's kind of the approach that we take, and really look at and ground ourselves in that. So that's just kind of a way that we try to do that too.
Ruben, thank you for that awesome contribution. Time has gotten away from us, so we have one more question. And we have a few questions to ask. And so we're going to end on this question here, and then we're going to wrap it up with a few announcements. And how can we better support persons of color, BIPOC, and other folks from marginalized identities on campus as students? Hello?
Yeah, that one's really hard because I think a lot of us are so far removed from the role of student that it's hard to like put ourselves in that perspective, right? I remember being like a young person and extremely frustrated with how little anybody in admin budges when you bring up anything. I think that the best way as a fellow student to help your comrades on campus, like your BIPOC fellow students, is to like be a fierce advocate and ally when no one else is raising hell. Raise hell until something happens. Don't let what's the word? Don't take no for an answer, basically. Like obviously do these things in a safe manner with people you can trust, right? But do not let these systems and these people who are upholding these systems make you believe that nothing can be done to change. Racist teachers, racist admin, racist district members do not belong on campuses. And that applies to from pre-K all the way to the graduate level. So raise hell is my answer to that.
I say ditto to that as well.
Same here.
All right now.
I think
We have
Adrian
it.
nailed it on that one.
Hey, we
Well stated.
HE double hockey sticks on them, you know, but you better raise everything that you can. And part of that is just being a warrior and really understanding what warriors do. They prepare a path for folks to come after them, right? And so, you know, just be a warrior when it comes to advocating for other folk. So as we're closing down, a few announcements. So the first announcement centers on the survey. Right? We definitely want to hear from you, and we want to hear some things that you liked, maybe some areas of growth, or just any compliments that you want to provide, you know, us, Dr. Lopez, myself, and the panelists. And I believe that link is going to be dropped in the chat for you to complete. Also, we're going to provide a link for future healing spaces. And so in the survey, there's an opportunity for you to indicate that you would like to participate in further healing spaces that potentially will be facilitated by one of us here on the panel. And Dr. Lopez, did I leave out any closing remarks there?
No, that's it. I just want to thank everyone for joining, and just our panelists. Thank you so much for just bringing your authenticity, your spirit, your vulnerability, your truth, your honesty. I could not think of a better way to end the series. And, you know, just please stay in touch with us. Again, give us feedback, give us direction. You know, we're here. We're here to serve all of you, and we hope to continue to bring these conversations and to bring individuals like this today to continue to affirm their knowledge, their brilliance, and their spirit. So with that, I just want to thank everyone for being here, and we will be posting this recording, and it will be closed captioned so we can share that with others. And we will be reaching out to anyone who does sign up for to be part of a healing circle who would like support. We'll be reaching out one-on-one as you sign up. So thank you all, and have an amazing, beautiful evening.